Welcome to the Grief Mentor podcast. This is your host, Teresa Davis, and I have two special guests with me here on the show today, Erin Nelson and Colleen Montague. Colleen, did I say that right?
Montague.
Montague. Okay, I meant to ask you that before we started rolling. So, Erin Nelson and Colleen Montague. And before we start today's conversation, I just want to tell you, my listeners, why I invited these two incredible ladies to join me. You know my heart, and I want this space to meet you exactly where you are in your grief. And today's episode is going to do exactly that. Erin Nelson is the founder and executive director of Jessica's House, a grief support center for children and families. Her husband, Tyler, died in a plane crash, and her mom by suicide, and her precious son, Carter, in a car accident. She's an advanced certified trauma practitioner and has been supporting grieving families for more than 20 years now. Colleen is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she is the director of community outreach for Jessica's House, supporting parents and their children after death in their family. So, wherever you are today, if you're folding laundry, if you're sitting in your car, or just trying to make it through the next hour, I hope you'll stay with us because there's something very special in this episode for you today. If you're grieving the death of your child and you want the steps that lead to believing with confidence that life is still worth living, then you're in the right place. Hello, I'm Teresa, a grief mentor. That's been where you are, and I teach grieving moms like you how to navigate life after child loss. If you're ready to take a step of courage and build a solid foundation to live with hope and purpose, then I'm here to teach you how. Are you ready for what God has for you? Then I'm ready to teach you. So, ladies, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. We're so grateful to be here with you today.
Thank
And
you,
Colleen,
Teresa.
thank you for joining us too. We appreciate that. Are you ladies in different states?
We are right next to each other. We have our offices in at Jessica's house, and so yeah, we just share a wall. So it's so nice. We're right there.
You're right there. Oh, that's great. That's beautiful.
hmm
I like that. And then just tell us where is Jessica's house located? What state?
We're in California, so we're right in the Central Valley, kind of in the middle where all the agriculture happens. And just, yeah, that's where we are.
Okay. All right, in California. And we'll get into Jessica's house a little more a little later. But Erin, I'd like to start with your story. And I want to
hmm
start off with the faith piece before we move into all the other topics that we have planned today.
hmm
But many of us struggle with faith and loss. And in your
mm
book, and we'll talk a little bit about more about Erin's book and Colleen, they're co-authors in the book When Grief Comes Home. But in the book, you do discuss your faith. So I'd like for you to take us
mm
back to the beginning of your loss. How was your faith challenged? How did it grow? Just like where were you then
mm.
and where are you now?
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. And when I think about my faith, I think that each loss has been very different for me. And when I think about my faith, when Tyler died when my children were 5 and 3, and it was in 1995. So quite a few years ago. And there was something about his accident. It was a plane crash. And I really somehow held on to my faith in a very strong way. I just felt a sense of peace, and it's really hard to explain how that was for me. And with my mom's death, which was just very soon after that, I was very crushed. She lived with a mental health disorder, and it was very difficult. She cycled between being very depressed or manic for many, many years, and I always had so much hope that she would finally find a treatment that would work. And so I feel like I was crushed in that way and disappointed. And I think my faith had some impact. But when Carter died, my son Carter, which was in 2019, my faith took a really big hit. And I it's hard to explain what all the circumstances were, but I felt very taken off guard by his death. It just really was such a surprise. He was just driving home from a friend's one night on a Monday, and he lost control of his car, and he actually didn't die at impact, but he died a couple of days later at the hospital. And you know, we really just hoped and prayed that he would be okay. And
Mm.
it really, I just struggled with God. Like, I just had prayed so many times for my children to be protected and for their safety to be preserved. And so I was very shattered that, especially after all the loss that I had gone through, that Carter died. And it was just so unbelievable to me that my son would die. And it was, I had to be very honest with God. And it was a while before I could open up my trust with him, because I felt like just so open, or something that I just started really fearing for my safety and for other people in my family's safety, because I had really trusted God with it, even despite my other losses. And so it was really big for me. And I had to allow myself to be there, and also to let God lean in with understanding and compassion, that I didn't understand this, and that it was a mystery that this happened, and that my faith would come back just bit by bit. And I'm really grateful for God's love and how He's welcomed me into a space of trusting Him and feeling loved and protected by Him again. And so it's been a while, but I think the honesty with Him was exactly where I needed to be.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Erin. And you've echoed all I think of our grief journeys as moms, especially as believers, is that protection piece.
Hmm.
So I'm curious, uh, when did Colleen come? Was she a part of your grief journey? Is at that point, when did you guys become a partner?
Mm, yes. So I guess, what year was it, Colleen?
It was 2019 when I first became a volunteer for
That's
Jessica's
right.
house.
Yeah. Yeah, so Colleen started with Jessica's House as a volunteer, and I remember her telling me that, when she learned that Carter died, we actually are neighbors. We live pretty close to each other, and she was a very close neighbor to my dad at the time. And so she would see me out taking walks and different things. And I know that she knew that Carter had died just as being part of Jessica's house. And um, I guess in 2021, Colleen, was it that
22, actually.
22? Okay,
Yeah.
that she came on as a staff member. And so, as it was really an interesting kind of time, because I'd had this book, When Grief Comes Home, in my heart. And I went to a writers' conference close by. We live in the Central Valley of California, and we were in Santa Cruz area at Mount Hermon. And as I drove down the hill that day, I called her and said, "Hey, let's write a book together." And she was like, "Okay." So that's how we came together. And Colleen, you know, the way she welcomes grief and her tenderness, her attunement, and it's such a welcoming space. And she had demonstrated that so beautifully in group with parents who are grieving. And to watch her with the light that is very rare for somebody who can come in and just really welcome and create a space for grieving moms and dads. It was such a gift to be able to witness what she did and the work that she did. And so it was such a beautiful fit. And she was also a lover of writing. It was so good to feel like God really put us together to create a resource for parents who are grieving while supporting children in their grief.
Well, I just want to tell you, because when your publishers reached out to me initially, I was interested because of your story. And I want to go back a little bit and talk about the timeline a little more. But it was interesting because she was trying to send me some excerpts of the book, and it was through a website, and so I was not having much luck with that. So I finally, your publisher, your spokesperson Ann, was so nice because I
Mhm.
said, look, I'm interested, but I'm done with trying to get this on this website. This is not working well. And then she sent me the whole book, and so then I sat
Mhm.
down and just read the whole thing, and of course, connected very much with your story because of course all my listeners know that my son Andrew died in a plane crash.
Mm.
But let's back up a little bit, Erin. So your husband's death was in 1995,
It was, yes.
and then your mother's death shortly followed. This was it the same year you said?
It was a few months later, but it was in 1996. Tyler died in June, and then she had her attempt at suicide in January and died in March
Okay. And then Carter's death was in what year?
2019.
2019. Okay.
Hmm.
Thank you for that. So just for clarification. So
Hmm.
I'm so, I know you have so much value to bring to my audience. And I know what they're thinking right now because I know them really well. Because they're thinking about is the fear of the what ifs that they deal with every day. So we're going to
Mm.
get into that. But
Hmm.
as far as your faith journey, for all of the moms that are, suffering with where is God in my grief? Where,
Yeah.
why didn't you protect my child? Can you just tell us, what would you say to a grieving mom who's struggling that to
Mm.
believe that God is still writing her story?
Mm. You know, as I processed how I was feeling, which actually took me by surprise because my faith had always been intact, like I said, during other losses. And I really just was able to be honest with God. But what I felt Him saying to me was that He would restore my faith because it came from Him.
Mm.
And so I didn't have to try to restore my faith again because that was God's work. And so, as I was honest with Him and I allowed time for me to begin to trust Him again, I felt Him so close. Even when I wondered about where He was, I could still feel His presence. And as He leaned in so close to say, your faith comes from me and I will restore it. And just, I leaned into that, knowing that I didn't have to try so hard. But over time, it would be restored, just like He restores everything else in creation. He's always restoring. That's what He does. And so, as I trusted that, it naturally came back. And it was so beautiful because it was just piece by piece, brick by brick, that I got to like kind of, I don't know, the image I have in my mind is like little platforms. It's like this little piece happened and then another. And it was just something that just seemed very natural. But it was because He was doing it. And He was patient with me as I was able to just be and kind of surrender, and He was just there to hold me in it.
So that's been 6 years ago. So
Mhm.
when did you, if you can recall, because a lot,
Mhm.
we understand as grieving moms, it's a big blur, but at what point do you think you began to really feel His presence? When did you hear from Him that I will restore your faith? And then how long did it take before He actually restored your faith, or you felt that He restored your
Mm.
faith?
I mean, I feel like it was a process. I feel like those first 2 years were pretty hard.
Mhm.
I remember kind of waking up when I was like 5 years out and thinking to myself, wow, like I'm not having some of that hypervigilance that I was having that kind of came from trauma, from the way Carter died, and some of those pieces where it was tied with kind of a feeling of unsafety, even with God. And so I feel like there was some kind of like connections with trusting God to protect us and also having some residual trauma from just the accident and just naturally needing to find safety again in my world. But I would say when I started really feeling better, I was about 5 years out, and I started just feeling my nervous system begin to settle, and how God was working within my, pathways in my brain and healing. And so I would just say, like, that feels like a really long time. And I remember, I think if I was newly bereaved and someone said 5 years, I would think, like, wow, that feels like a long time. And at the same time, I think it shows the gravity of what it feels like to lose a child.
Oh, hmm. Yes, 100%. I agree 100%. And you spoke very well. The feeling of unsafety. I like that
Mhm.
word,
Mhm.
unsafety. And I'm curious, were you certified as a trauma specialist before Carter's death, or is this that came something that came after?
Yeah, so I think it was about 2008, 2009. After Tyler died, and I began working in ministry in my church and just had a natural desire to help other people, and then realized that it needed to be bigger. We were helping in our church, but there wasn't the infrastructure we needed to really focus long term on a family, children, and a family that had been impacted by a death. And so I went back to school, and that's when I pursued that. So that was before Jessica's House opened, which was in 2012. So I did that, kind of went back and did some certifications before I started Jessica's House.
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking how surreal, because we know, ladies, that God is in our future, right? What happened with Tyler and your mom and Carter
Mhm.
was not a surprise to God. And so just hearing you describe that journey, I just feel that God was leading you. He knew what was in your future. And so often, we go through such an identity crisis when our children die, and then it's that struggle and the whole trauma piece, because most child death is sudden. So listening to you share that story, I just see God's hand all over your story. So I want the grieving mom on listening today to understand that, right? God was in front of you. He was ahead of your story. He was preparing you for something that you had no idea that was in your future. And the beauty of that is the fact that you were serving others.
Mm.
And I'm curious, which I think I know your answer. It's like, even though you had the ability to understand trauma, when you experienced personal trauma, it probably required you to seek out from yourself, to seek help outside of yourself. Would you agree with
Oh,
that?
yeah, absolutely. And Teresa, I'm glad you're saying that, because something I'm very grateful for, and I could even say as I drove to the hospital the night that we got the phone call, I was so aware of the resources I needed, like taking deep breaths and, just all the things that I knew that I needed to do to help me stay grounded and to regulate my nervous system. And those really, really helped me in the waiting and in the trauma. And also, I have a somatic therapist that I work with, and also a spiritual director. And so I have two people that are very well integrated with trauma and how you heal from trauma. And I'm very thankful that I have two resources that I access regularly and even today to help me through this.
Mhm. And I'm so glad you said that, because, I'm 7 years into my journey and I still wrestle. I still need help. I still reach out. I leave that door open. The beauty of your
Mhm.
story, Erin, I feel, is that you are open to realizing that there's no end dates on our grief. And even in the stage you are now, you're verbalizing, there's still days that I need help. So
Mhm.
for the grieving mom listening on the other side, I want her to hear that it is a process. It is a journey. We take that one step at a time. It's the waiting, because
Mhm.
in my work with grieving moms, and even in the ministry, as Tony and I are involved in the While We're Waiting ministry, we see that a lot. They just want to be on the other side of the pain.
Mhm.
But what we both know is that that pain, when we invite Jesus his presence into that pain, that's when it changes. And then we carry that pain differently as we walk out our journey. So, Colleen, I want to bring you into this conversation because you're very skilled at working with grieving families. So, when you encounter someone in Aaron's path and my path, what are some of the first steps that you take with them in your professional role?
Mm. I think the best thing that I've learned at Jessica's house actually is just that I can't fix it. I can't take away their pain, but what I can do is have this open heart to want to come alongside them, to try to understand and to just hold that space with them. And I think that I've learned that's the best gift that I can give somebody because with the best of intentions, there's so many out there that want to fix. They don't want to see the person that they care about in so much pain. And so they may give them, like bright sighting statements like, oh, at least you had them for as long as you did, or at least you have other children. And none of those things help though, because it's to bring them out of their pain. It's not to let them be and go in there with them into that darkness. And so instead, just being an alongsider is something that Erin and I, that's, she does that now beautifully for families. She works alongside children and parents who have lost either a spouse or a child. And we know that that companionship is such a gift in the world that we live in today. So that's just like a first step to coming alongside somebody who's grieving.
Never heard that term, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. Alongsider. What a blessing. What a blessing because you know because you work with grieving moms, we don't want to hear those platitudes. We don't want to hear those things because that doesn't help us in any way. But it is uncomfortable. Wouldn't you say, Colleen? It's very uncomfortable to sit with someone in that pain, but you both have vocalized that, allowing yourself to be in that pain. Now, there is an element of despair that we can slip into as grieving moms, and that is hopelessness. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want that path to drag us down into that area of despair. But being able to be in that pain and experience it and allow that to evolve and to being able to invite his presence into it. Because, Colleen, do you believe that in working with families and grieving moms, do you believe that that pain and that belief of the presence of God can sit side by side?
Oh, yeah. I think that what we have seen over and over and over again with the families we serve is when they can find a little hope in whatever form that is, there's so much power, there's so much buoyancy that that can give to a mom. Even with our groups here, everybody's in different stages of their loss. Some have just experienced it this year, some are a couple years out. So even being in a room with somebody else who really gets what you're going through because they've lost a child too, but they're a little bit further along, that newly bereaved mom can notice the difference. And that can offer them some hope of like, okay, that mom's 2 years out and she's actually laughing right now. And I'm
Mhm.
nowhere close to that, but maybe I can be. Even just hearing, how somebody's faith has impacted their grief, it may not be what they're feeling. Maybe they are really angry at God, and this other mom is, God is everything to her right now and helping her get through. But just the idea that it's okay to be where you are because it doesn't mean you'll be there forever. And so just to be very authentic with how you're feeling, very true to that. I really admire Erin for being able to share the two different experiences she had with her faith and to know that it was okay to go into that space and question, why God would take Carter. But to now know that, she was able to do some deep work with that, with God, and come out even more, I would say, deep and strong in your faith, I would imagine, right, Erin?
That's right. Mhm.
Mhm. That's beautiful, ladies. I can tell you guys are a tremendous team. And I love your philosophy because it is what I teach. And because I am a grieving mom, I understand the desire to move quickly through it, but that is just not how it works, is it, ladies?
I know. You would just want to be out of pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just standing outside one day and just thinking, I don't want to be sad.
Mm.
Like, it just this feeling that how daunting it is to know how long it takes to grieve, and just you don't want to just feel that sadness all the time. And I like what Colleen said, is that you won't always feel this way. And there are some moments of relief, of course. And I really believe that God has his mercy in that when you're grieving. But just the nature of grief and the time it takes and the work it is really, it's a big job. And so it's hard to imagine it, and you just want to be out of pain, but trusting God's faithfulness in it. And I think I was always so amazed at the moment by momentness of him, and how, as I would feel things, I would be honest and express them, and how in that next moment somehow I would find some relief. And I love that it mimics nature in so many ways. And we like to talk even about how, like, the analogy of the waves of grief,
Mm.
but how there's always a building, peaking, and then a resolving in some ways. And to know that, or receding, I should say, and we feel that building when we're grieving, and we feel the peaking, but then we do feel the receding. And it helps us to trust that, as our grief feels so heavy at times, that we can trust that it will recede. And so I love how God really demonstrates that, not only in nature, but also in us.
If I could add to that too, Erin, you know, you can be we can be quick to give ourselves platitudes at times,
Mm.
like I should really just be trusting God in this process, or it's been 5 years and I'm still so sad. Like I should be better now, or it's been a year and I'm still so sad. I should be better now. So we can be quick to offer those kind of bright siding statements to ourselves. But what Erin has really taught me is just that we can be an alongsider to ourselves.
Mm.
We can just really allow ourselves to enter into that space, even though it's really hard and it's scary and it's so big. But we can nurture our grief. We can take care of ourselves. We can allow it to be, because if we integrate it, and through other practices like the somatic practices, which help us kind of ride through the body sensations during those really tough moments, then we can come out the other side. We know that feeling won't last forever, and we can go on into the next moment. And that is, as Erin has shared with me and so many others, that's a big part of her healing process, is that she really allowed herself to go into that space and really feel her grief as it arose.
I think one thing that I learned is that I really trust the grief process that God has put inside of us.
Mm.
And I really trust that when we lean into it, that He has created it in us and we know how to do it. And as we do it, that He will be with us in it, and we will integrate and come through it. And we carry that person with us, but we do get through that grief process.
Let's use this for a segue because I want to jump ahead a little bit to one of our points because we're just speaking to it so wonderfully. And that's the fear piece. And in my opinion, the urgency that comes along with our grief journey is rooted in that fear space that Erin, you use the word unsafety, and I love that because that fear piece that comes into our reality. First of all, how could this happen to me? what is my life going to look like going forward, especially in your circumstances, Aaron, because your husband died and that whole fear of your whole future. What does my financial safety look like? That whole piece of losing a spouse and that journey, losing the love of your life. And then with child loss, that's a whole different type of loss, which you know really well. But I think that fears piece, I'd like to speak to that for a few minutes because
Mhm.
that is definitely where a lot of moms, grieving moms, get stuck, is in the fear of the what ifs. And
Mm.
I can't tell you how many times that comes up in my work with grieving moms is the what if this happens to me again?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'd like to start with you, Erin, first, and then Colleen. I'd like to bring in your expertise about that because when fear and grief collide, it's
Mm.
combustible. Would you agree? I mean, and it can really influence us and take us down a journey that is not healthy for us. Can lead to complicated grief, prolonged grief, can lead to uncontrolled anxiety and fear of the future. So let's settle here for a minute because you spoke to it a little bit about already how fear showed up in your losses, but did you have that? Let's see, if I recall, you said that you felt strong in your faith after your husband's loss and your mom's loss.
Mhm.
You didn't necessarily experience that what if as much, maybe after your son died. So
Mhm.
speak to that a little bit. Did you have the fear of what if I have another loss?
I did. I definitely did. And part of the fear piece, and I just to speak to what we know at Jessica's house and all the thousands of families that we've seen and the children, one thing that we will ask the children sometimes is like, raise your hand if you've ever been also scared that something else bad may happen. Normalizing that after, especially when you haven't ever had a loss before, and for many of our children, they've never experienced loss before, we can normalize that once you experience a loss, you kind of say to yourself, well, what else could happen? Because nothing has happened like that, and you never imagine that. And I would imagine, Teresa, even with your son's tragic accident, you were never imagining anything like that could ever happen to you or your family, your son. And as these families that come to us, we normalize what that feels like after this tragic thing happened and how we will say what else will happen. And then I really liked your word stuck because that's where we try to bring ourselves into the present moment. Sometimes we can fear what happened, like kind of we're thinking about what happened before, or we're thinking about what could happen in the future. After Carter died, my son, Cody, he and his wife, they played volleyball in their backyard, like they tossed a ball back and forth. You can't actually worry about the future or the past when you're concentrating on even catching a ball. So we do a lot of practices to help kind of retrain our brain to stay kind of in that present moment and to give ourselves a break from that loop that can happen naturally after someone dies. And sometimes it's really about reminding your body and your brain about how to stay here. And when we have trauma, every stick becomes a snake sometimes. And so we think, oh, there's a snake, but it's really just a stick. And it really is about creating safety, finding ways to give your brain a break, and practicing what that feels like in your body to come back to that present moment, whether that's through breathing. We do a lot of bilateral movement. I love, we have ping pong here at Jessica's house, and you can't like anticipate how a ball will come at your paddle and also worry about the future. And so anything that we can do to incorporate hiking, like watching your footing, we have a little obstacle course here at Jessica's house, and kids can actually reimagine what that could feel like by doing activities that can keep their brain in a place where they can stay present. And over time, as we can express our fears, hold those fears with others, and also express our stories in nonverbal ways sometimes with trauma, it really helps us to begin to have more feelings of safety in our body. And I think that's something that just happens over time and with practice.
What do you have to add to that, Colleen?
I know there's not much. She's pretty awesome with what she said. I think the one thing I would add is, if you wanted to do an activity with your child, for one of your listeners, you know, it's nice to just start talking about, how we're feeling, but that's really hard for a kid. So how can you help them to become aware of what those different feelings are and to name it? And then what do you do with that feeling? And so one activity we have here is we have little drums, but really two wooden sticks on the counter at home would work just fine. Hey, what does worry feel like in your body? If it had a rhythm or if it had a movement with, kind of drumming it out, what does it feel like in your body? Here's what it feels like in mine. We both know what worry is, but it might feel differently in my body than yours. If your worry had a font, what would it look like? Get some pen and paper out and have them. We have one downstairs where it's very squiggly, the word worry, that's the font. So another one might be loopy, just their tummy, just kind of just doing somersaults. And knowing that these feelings in our body have an energy. So what does it feel like when you're worried? I feel my worry in my tummy. I get really anxious. Some kids feel their worry, in other parts of their body. So what could we do to help that energy? Well, my favorite is I like to shake it out just like a dog does when it's worried during fireworks. So let's just shake it out together and move our whole body and then notice how we feel after. So this kind of one concept, but there's so many different ways to explore it and talk about it and express it. And the whole idea too is that you're helping them know what works for them so that when they feel worried about life, about other things in life, which will it be natural, they'll have some tools. And that goes along with all the things Aaron was talking about too, of ways they can come back into their body, feel grounded, kind of ride out that moment of that rush of anxiety or worry or fear that they're having, and then ride through it and get themselves to that other side of it with all of their little coping skills that they have.
Yeah, I would add too, and that was so good, Colleen. Just on a personal note, Teresa, I have about a year after Carter died, my family, we all decided to go to Disneyland and just remember him there at a place that he really enjoyed. And we all went down, and it was January. It gets pretty foggy here in the Central Valley, and there was a place on our freeway that was quite foggy. And I was having a little bit of driving anxiety during that time. And just as you spoke about, like we could worry about what could happen next. And so just even like bringing my body into a place where I just felt more confident, kind of making myself a little bit bigger while I was driving, the bilateral movement of just like getting my brain back online, like I'm safe. I'm safe right now, like squeezing the steering wheel right and left and being with myself in a compassionate way is, we can say to ourselves, like putting our hand over your heart, like it's understandable that you're scared right now. Something really bad happened to you, and you're afraid of what other things might happen, but you're safe in this moment. And being able to bring compassion to yourself, bring practices, and find what really works for you. And over time, it really does help. And you begin to worry less and less about what else could happen.
That's great advice. And I think what I just hear both of you in both your descriptions for the grieving mom, for a grieving child, is help them develop skills to stay in the moment.
Mhm.
And that is something that I encourage the moms that I work with, because when we grieve initially, it's we stay in the past when our child was with us and the future when they won't be with us. And it's extremely difficult to stay in the present. So I love all of your suggestions on ways for us to stay in the present, for both a child and for a grieving mom. And one thing that I also try to help my grieving moms understand, if somebody would have told me, Teresa, if one of your children died, would you live through it? I would say absolutely not,
Mm,
because we think this is not something that we're capable to live through. But here I am, and I
mm,
did live through it, and the Holy Spirit was with me in the moments that I didn't even feel him. And so I like to encourage grieving moms, you're stronger than you think you are. And settling in that moment of being able to ground yourself in that moment is that, you know what? I'm responsible for this moment that I'm living right now, because we do not
Mm.
have a guaranteed of that tomorrow's even going to come for us, right?
Mhm.
So if we can find a way to ground ourselves in this moment, I love that, because then that allows us to be able to settle all of those hormones, to relax a little bit, and for
Mhm.
us to be able to realize, okay, I may not be able to control my past or my future, but I can control this moment that I'm in right now. I
Mm.
just think that's so important. And I love the way that you guys teach that for both, you know, for kids and for their parents. So share with us, because grieving in a child's world is so dramatically different than the way we grieve. So speak to that. I don't, whoever wants to speak to that, as far as a mom, which, did Carter have siblings, or was Carter the youngest?
He was, so Tyler and I had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and then I remarried Brian, and then we had Carter, first, and then Camille. So, yeah, so 3 s Carter had 3 siblings.
And so, if I don't, whichever one of you want to speak to this, because so many of my grieving moms have siblings at home. Sometimes they're adults and they don't want to talk about it at all. And then sometimes there's the littles that are trying to grieve through, you know, my sister, my brother was here today and they're gone now. So, how does a child's grief, let's speak to that first. How does a child manage grief differently than an adult?
Yeah, what we've seen children do is they really explore their world through play. And it may not look like they're grieving, but they are. They're figuring it out, they're processing it. And so just having different ways for expression, whether that's through art or play. We have here at Jessica's house, even just, little toy ambulances or fire trucks or police cars. We actually have like a little hospital room. But there's little doctor kits. Just kids want to try to understand their world. And through that play, that's part of their exploration. And then kids also, they really dose themselves. They're very good teachers to us as adults of you cannot feel the enormity of your loss all at once. That would be overwhelming. And so naturally, kids just kind of dip in and out of it. One moment they're playing, and the next they're going to dive in and do a little bit of that grief work, whether that's expression through art or verbalizing or through play. And then they come right back out and then go back out into that play mode. And I'm kind of using my hands like a wave in that regard. And so, but it looks different for your older kids. And like you said best, sometimes like teenagers or young adults might be a little bit more quiet or withdrawn at times. And maybe they aren't more as much of like wanting to kind of express it. And so that can be tough. It can be hard to know how they're doing for those that are more quiet. And so I think it's really a balancing act if you have multiple kids, you're learning about each of their different grieving styles. And we see that so often in siblings. Everybody's grieving differently in the home. And I notice on each of our screens, we each have a potted plant in the background. And Erin has taught me that her approach with young adults and teens is to be a potted plant for her kids at home, being there, being available when they're ready or when they need you. But sometimes you're kind of just off to the side, and that's okay. They know they can come to you when they're ready to kind of reach out for that support or to do some of that processing. But the way that they know you're open to it is how you are open to your grief. And you, as a mom, are willing to talk about how you're doing, how you're feeling, bringing up your partner's name, saying, I wonder what dad would have thought of this. Or I really wish dad were here right now. Because when you're modeling that morning, it offers permission to your children that you're here for it. You're okay. They're not going to break you. A lot of times kids are the teens especially are really worried to make you more sad, but you already are as their mom, it's not going to make it even harder. So just that you're open to it, you're here for it. Anything you'd add to that, Erin?
Oh, it's so beautiful, and I really like what you're saying, Colleen, just about bringing that person into the present moment. Just asking, like, "I wonder what dad would think of this right now." And also, something that Colleen says quite often is even with tears, that when you cry and, as those tears just come, that you're modeling healthy grief for your child. And so much of the time, we'll get questions here at Jessica's house from parents saying, well, should I cry in front of my children? And modeling healthy grief and how God has placed, put crying inside of us and what a good work it does in our brains and in our bodies, and how we are healing when we do allow ourselves to cry. It models how children can dip into that resource that God has given us. Our body is a resource that God has given us, and it helps us to heal. And so when we model that for our children, they're learning how to grieve as well.
I love that so much because it's such a heavy weight. Because the next piece I want to move into is, mom, how do you grieve and make space for you while you're trying to manage grieving children? So I love everything that you guys express because I agree 100% that if we shield them, even the little ones, and they're so much more intuitive than we give them credit for. And then the fact that, what'd you call it, Colleen?
Alongside?
When you were talking about the children, how they grieve,
Oh, they
uh,
dose themselves.
dose themselves. Yes. Oh, I
Mhm.
love that because I kind of call it episodic. They'll hang on to something, they'll see or hear something, but they may not talk about it for a
Mhm.
week or 2 weeks. So I love that. They dose themselves.
Mhm.
Beautiful. I love that terminology. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I'd like to move into that space, Erin, because I have so many grieving moms that have small children at home all the way up to teenage years.
Mhm.
And, they're active, they're in sports and they're in school and doing their things. But how did you do that? How both of you can speak to this, your expertise. How do you make space for yourself as a mom to grieve and while creating a healthy environment for your children to grieve as well? How do you do that? How do you manage that?
Mm. Well, I know, just when I think back, and my children were 5 and 3 when Tyler died, I think just being honest, with them, with their questions that they might have, really expressing my grief as I felt it. As Colleen mentioned earlier, there's energy with grief, and as you feel that energy in your body that needs to be expressed, being able to express it in the moment. And really being there to say, like, what questions do you have? And, because sometimes they may not naturally ask you, those parts of the questions that they have, that are things that are on their mind. And so sometimes we could just ask that and really just talk to them developmentally about the truth of what happened, and making sure that developmentally it's appropriate for their age and understanding. But I think what we've learned at Jessica's house is kids really love to be told the truth. They want to be trusted with the truth.
Mm,
And so being able to be honest about what happened, and even with imagination, I have a memory of when I was talking, because my husband died in a midair collision. And when I was talking to my son, and he was 3 at the time, and I was trying to explain to him what happened to daddy. And I remember we were in the sandbox that Tyler built, and he picked up these toys and kind of crashed them together. And he was asking me, like, was it like this or was it like
mm,
that? And, that was the first time that I realized that kids really want to play out their questions, and they want to imagine what happened. My daughter said, well, I think the pilot was thirsty, so he reached down to get his drink, and then he didn't see the other plane. And so I realized that she was processing in her own mind about what could have happened and why the pilot may not have seen the other airplane. And so, as you have those open conversations with your child, as my son, I remember him saying, well, what if we got a ladder? The ladder daddy used, we would just put it on the roof and we could just bring daddy back from heaven.
mm.
And I think, like, being able to imagine, like, wow, like, wouldn't that be awesome? If we could just get on a ladder right now and pull daddy back. And I wish we could do that and just wishing with them, all of their wishes and their hopes, like being with them in their imagination. Like, yeah, I wonder what, maybe the pilot was thirsty. Like maybe that's what happened and we don't know. And so not jumping in to correct or anything, because there are a lot of mysteries many times when someone dies, and we can just, all their wishes and wonderings, we can just join them in that.
What would you add to that, Colleen? And add, Aaron, if you would, how did you make space for yourself to be able to grieve
Mm,
inside of that support that you were given to your children?
mhm. One thing that I know about myself is that I really had to listen, and I'll speak to after Carter died. It was a long time before I could, do life like I did it before. I'm talking about getting up, taking a walk, doing the things that I normally did. I really let myself be in kind of like comfortable clothes, making sure that, I knew from a trauma perspective that if I took care of myself on a sensory level, my brain would heal.
Mm.
And so that meant that I was aware that I could eat the foods that felt comforting to me, to make sure that the people around me gave me life and energy, that I really had to be very careful about who came into the space and what I did and what I said yes to. And so I took, from a trauma perspective, I knew I needed to take a really good care of myself. And I knew the ramifications and what would happen if I didn't. And I knew I wouldn't heal like I needed to be there for my kids and my family, and to continue to be the wife and the friend and the member of my community that I wanted to be in the future. So I really took care of myself the very best way I could, and I made space for that. I didn't have young children at the time. My daughter was home from college, and she was 18, and we really just did. We stayed home a lot, and we watched movies together. We were just really kind of just together in it, and we really slowed our life down in so many ways.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just to echo Aaron of, you're not the person you once were.
Mm.
You have suffered a catastrophic injury to your soul and to your life. And so when I see moms, especially trying to function in the way they used to, it's like this uphill battle because they actually don't have the capacity they did. They don't have the energy. Grief is so exhausting
Mm.
and really limits our resources. And so once you're able to give yourself a little bit of that permission, that you don't have to function the way that you used to, and then, like Erin mentioned, she didn't have young kids, but some of your listeners probably do. So then what do you do with that? Well, is there anything you can outsource? What are your support systems like? Do you have other family or friends that can help you with things, even so much as like making the school lunches for a while? It's such a small little task, but like, I'm sure you don't care about making lunches when you're in the throes of that deep, deep grief, but can someone else do that for you? Can they help with school pickup or drop offs? Can they fold laundry for you? Those things that you don't need to try to keep holding yourself as you do what Aaron suggested, which is to really go within and really just be with who you are in this moment with all of those limited capacities that you're now in.
I love that so much because we do expect ourselves to be able to have the bandwidth to manage not only physically, but emotionally our life before, because,
Mhm.
our life becomes before and after. And I think what you both have said beautifully explains the giving yourself permission to not have to be that same person and to meet others' expectations. Because one thing you said, Aaron, was You surround yourself. My terminology that I use and I teach is surround yourself with safe people, people
Mhm.
that are there for your benefit, not theirs. And
Yes.
that, really creates that environment that starts to feel more safe, that we don't have to somehow perform in ways that
Mm.
we're not capable of, and
Mhm.
just give ourselves permissions to. I love, Colleen, what you said about outsourcing, because the simple of task can feel so monumental, and just the layer of that heavy, life is continuing. When mine stopped, that whole concept of
Mhm.
slowing down, both of you have just spoken to that so well. I just hope the listeners take that to heart and really just give themselves the grace to be able to not demand so much of ourselves. Because and something you said, I latched on to, Colleen, you said we can be alongsiders for ourselves, and I think we forget that as grieving
Mhm.
moms, because so much, most of us as grieving moms manage so much in our lives, and so it's so difficult to give ourselves permission to have that same grace with us. So I love it. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. And I want to move into that as we close. I want to move into the community piece, because I want you both to speak to the hope that people have inside of Jessica's house. I really would like for you both to speak about community, because the term that I like to use, I caution my moms not to live on Grief Island, because
Mm.
it's a very lonely place, and it
Mm.
can lead us into that period of hopelessness and despair, and change our outlook on life. So I want you both to speak about community, and especially your community that you've created.
Mm. Well, for parents and children to come to a space, when they first come in for the very first time, to be in a group where every person there has a similar story. The resonance, the relief they find to be in a place where they don't have to work so hard, there's just an understanding. It really does bring something to them, strength and an anchor and a safe space. And so for Jessica's house, families come every other week. And for as long as they need support, it's completely free for families. And they go into groups, and for the children, they check in with a circle. They say their name, who died, how they died, and they all go around and they can really notice how they have similarities in each other's stories, and how they can really know that they're not the only one, which so much of the time out in the wild out there, you can feel alone, and whether you're at school or at work. And so to come to a space where you can express yourselves, and we always have some type of art and some type of sensory activity for the children, teens, and young adults. And then the adults are all in group together. So all those parents are supporting each other. So in our sibling loss group, all the parents have experienced the death of their child, so they can be together. And it really is a safe space to process their grief and to check in on each other, and to have a community who understands. And it's so similar to what you're doing, Teresa, and it's so powerful, and it's so amazing to watch how they take such good care of each other.
Yeah, and I know not all of your listeners are near us for our support, but if they go to nacg.org, which stands for the National Alliance for Children, Children's Grief, there is a search engine there, and they can type in their zip code and look up similar programs to ours that might be closer to them. And even if it's not super close by, I would always encourage just call the place, or any of your listeners are welcome to call us, because a lot of times we have resources that we can share with families, even if they can't come through our doors. And so we welcome them to contact us, or if they want to contact a center that's closer to them. And even on our website, Teresa, we have under our resources page, we have what's called a grief support group curriculum. But really, the parents can download that for free. And there's a bunch of our art activities in that.
Mm.
And so that can just be something that is a nice entryway to do with your child, doing that art, the little art activity together, and then kind of just seeing where the conversation takes you from there.
Now tell me the web address. Was it NACG
G dot dot
dot
org. So
org, and they
stands for
can put in their zip code and find a
mhm,
similar organization. So
mhm.
does Jessica House offer anything online?
We
We don't
don't.
have, yeah, we don't have groups right now online, but we do have several resources on our website, as Colleen mentioned. So they can just go to jessicashouse.org and look for those. And the Dougie Center was the very first grief center ever, and they opened in 1980. They've inspired about 400 or more grief centers across the nation that serve children and families. And so they're also a wonderful resource.
Thank you so much for that. I'm so thrilled to have some tools to give to moms to be able to help. So thank you for those
Mm,
resources, and I'll put all of that in my show notes. Now, tell us about the book, and
mm,
I've read that book cover to cover, and I highly encourage you to read it. It was very the way you guys. First of all, tell the format of the book, and
mm.
then tell us how they can get your book.
So, the format of the book is memoir. And so we have a little piece of my story at the beginning of each chapter. But then we go in, and that's where Colleen and I really collaborated to speak directly to parents about grief and also how they can support, first of all, themselves and then their children. And so there are activities at the end of every chapter and discussion questions, a little journaling prompt or something for parents to think about at the end of every chapter, and then also just discussion questions that they can talk about with their child.
Okay, that's great because it was uniquely written because it's just as you said. So I wanted to make sure that that they understand how that book is written because you two as a team is pretty dynamic. So I wanted to make sure that was understood the format of the book. And Colleen, what would you add?
I think we were very fortunate to have had a lot of time spent with other families and learned through them because everybody's story is a little different. And so, in the chapters of the book, they were really created based on topics we hear often in our group settings. And we were able to sprinkle in some others, stories that we've learned through families of what their experience was like, or what helped or what didn't help them. So, really, you're not just hearing from Aaron and I, you are hearing from over a decade of supporting families here through Jessica's house and through Aaron's earlier ministry too at her church.
And how can they get a copy of your book?
It's available anywhere books are sold, all major retailers. And so, yeah, it's a very bite-sized chapters. It's not a super big book, not very intimidating. And we really just hope it can be an alongside to you, your listener, as you read it, just to not feel so alone and just to know that there are others out there who are walking a similar path and that you're going to make it. You're going to make it through.
Mhm.
Ladies, this has been an amazing conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours. And
Yeah.
what a great resource for my audience. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I always include scripture. One of the things that the Holy Spirit showed me when I started the podcast was my word will accomplish what I set it out to accomplish. It will not return void. So I
Mm,
never have an episode where I don't include the word of God. I cannot escape the calmness of both of your voices. You can hear the tenderness and compassion in it. And those of us that are walking this road, we hear that. We can hear that intimacy in your voices. So I want to thank you both for that so much. And it's reminding me of the verse in Psalms 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those who are crushed in spirit. Thank you
mm,
for your ministry. And to every grieving mom listening today, I just want you to know that you're seen and you're heard. You're not forgotten in your grief. And these resources are here available. Take advantage of that. Get the book When Grief Comes Home. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. And ladies, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Teresa. So nice to be with you.
And that is all I have for you today. So until next time, take care.